Discuss today is going to be about universal principles, ancient philosophies, particularly in relationship to Vedic cosmology. And Vedas means knowledge. And the Vedas are the oldest spiritual writings on the entire planet. And so these writings have tremendous secrets about life. They discuss about life after death, life on other planets. They give tremendous understandings about how the individual can begin to revitalize their personal relationship with the Supreme Personality of God here. They help us to see the connection between different traditions, different teachers, why these things are existing, what their commissions are. Because sometimes we see there's Christianity, there's Islam, there's Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, there's so many different things. People wonder, has God made a mistake? Why is He created? So many teachings and so many systems and so many messengers that seemingly sometimes causes more confusion than edification. But it's not that God has made any mistakes. It's that we have different desires, different aspirations, different unfoldments in how we want to connect in service and in love to the Supreme Lord. And due to that, the same Supreme Lord, not that there's many, many gods, the same we refer to as Allah, as Yahweh, as Jehovah, as Adonai, as Supreme Personality, as we say Krishna, is all directing toward the same supreme, ultimate provider, controller, same. But each system is given some level of understanding in relationship to the Supreme. So I'm going to do two things. I do three things mainly. First, I'm endowed in some Western understandings because we have studied Western universities. I live mostly in Africa, and I visit many of the non-Western countries. And my particular major endowment is as a spiritual master, as a guru. In these kind of discussions, as we travel, as well as in television and radio, we try to help people to have a better understanding of the nature of the soul, a better understanding of the significance of culture, and how to apply spiritual principles in their life, the here and now. For ultimate preparation for the paradise, is the kingdom of God that we ultimately is our home. So I'm going to say a prayer and then share 2 or 3 short stories. And maybe I want to see what areas you want us to explore closer, and then we'll try to answer some things for you. Because we want you to leave here with not just hearing something that is entertaining to the mind, but to leave in the spirit of having some weaponry, some technology, the weapons of love, weapons of devotion, that helps you to be able to function better in your day-to-day life. It helps you to become able to avoid more of negative influences. That allows you to be more excited about what is accessible and available. To have a greater sense of appreciation of how wonderful that creation is once we can penetrate into some of the basic coverings. So if you give me 1 short minute, I'll make one prayer. Om Ganati Virandasya Ganatina Silakshaya Shakshyo Miridam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Namo Visdam Stapitam Yena Buddhane Swayam Rupakiramayam Vidanti Sabaransi Kam Nama Om Vishnu Pudaya Krishna Prasaya Buddhane Srimati Bhakti Viranta Swami Nitrinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Kutarine Devasesha Sundavani Paskatane Tutarine Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Dvaita Grahasi Vasani Go Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, first thing I'd like to share with you is we want to look at kind of a biographical sketch of one great personality. As we see, there are many religious traditions. With every tradition comes a acharya or an original prophet that helps to explain that philosophy to the world. And literally, the bona fide systems have a similar connection with the same God, but according to what's called Desha Kala Patra, or time, place, and circumstance, then the prophet comes and the prophet appears. It's okay. It's all right. It's coming. So according to time, place, and circumstances, different teachers appear different times in the world to be able to help the world in certain ways. So around 525 BC, Lord Buddha appeared in the world. And Lord Buddha appeared in a very interesting way. Buddha is an incarnation of Krishna, certain message to give. Now, he appeared in the family of a very royal family. He was a prince. So, in ancient cultures, there is very much access of rites of passage, or what is called samskara. So, when a child is born, when the child takes his first grain, makes his first step, reaches certain different levels of maturation, there's constant ceremonies. In culturalist environments, there's less and less emphasis on such things, because everything just kind of goes and happens. Everyone is individual. When there is sort of familyness, then not only is there emphasis about life changes, but the idea is that people want to give their blessings and their well wishes to support whatever life change is taking place. Whether there's a marriage or some other type of anniversary or ceremony, is that it's not just that the individual or the individual family is participating in that, but that the community becomes excited as they give their blessings and their well wishes. So this was very much a part of earlier civilization, and now some people are trying to revitalize it to hear these reception rites of passage. People trying to find out about some stuff. So then Buddha, after he was only a few days old, as part of samskara or investigation, an astrologer was called in. And the idea with the astrologer was to look and to examine, to see what type of soul this is who has incarnated at this time. And so that the parents could have some understanding of what they have brought into this world, and could also have some understanding of certain auspicious as well as inauspicious things to be expected. Astrology is a bona fide science. It's just that it's hard trying to find a bona fide astrologer. But the science itself is very powerful. And in ancient times, astrologer would know so many things in terms of planetary influences, but would also know physiognomy. Physiognomy is the science of looking at your face, at your forehead, at your eyes, at your nose, at your mouth, and being able to know so many things about you. Or the science of palmistry, looking at your hands, and being able to know so many things about you. And then at the same time, very powerful astrologers were very psychic and understood so much about the nature of the soul. So, therefore, as they would make their charting, they would use so many things to be able to evaluate a particular person. As we see, like in past times in the Krishna book, we see how astrologer was called. So, it wasn't just what we find now. Somebody takes a little book and put a few things together, or somebody gets a little magazine or something, and they're worried about their signs, and it was very deep involvement. So, this astrologer noticed, in looking at Buddha's life, at the soul who had taken that body, he realized that this is not a normal being. This being has come in from very high environments. And at a certain point in his life, will acquire a level of God consciousness which is known as nirvana. So, Buddha lived a very isolated life. And at 29, he came out of the palace. And sometimes people live isolated in suburbs, isolated in the ghetto, isolated with this race, isolated with this religion, and basically they're kind of unaware of so many other things. So that was his particular case. He lived in a very isolated way, with, very kind of royal lifestyle. But at 29, he left the palace. He started moving around into the city and into the village. And he was shocked. First, he was shocked to see that things weren't as sweet as he thought. In the palace, everything was all full of pomp and festiveness. And, there was simply no disease. And they didn't see death because things were just shoved away. So first, as he started walking around, looking in the cities and the villages, he saw so many sick people. He saw so much sickness. And he started to study this a little bit. He was sick. And so many difficulties. And then he started noticing so many elderly people. And then later he saw a corpse. And then at some point he saw what's called a mendicant, a person who has taken to a renounced order of life. And when he went back, his whole life changed. Because he began to notice that everyone is not living as he lived. Everyone is not just having so much opulences and so few things to worry about because everything is being served and arranged. And because he was a very deep, spiritually minded person, he felt tremendous compassion and literally sadness, to the point that he wanted to do something about it to see how to make life better for people. But he couldn't justify living as the way he was before, because he realized in order to do something to help the world, he had to understand the world better and had to gain certain strengths and potencies. So he literally died and lived first as like a shepherd or like a mendicant and a ascetic, where he just lived very simply in the forest and engaged in deep meditation. And after a while, after 6 years, he got bored with that. He was with about 6 or 7 other sages. And he began to realize that it's just not just by austerity you're going to gain realization, but it takes a certain kind of intense fixedness and determination. And it takes lessons, and it takes more compassion than what he had already been able to engender. So, at some point, he decided to live by himself, and he lived by what's called a famous Bodhi tree, where he was determined that whatever it took, he was going to stay under that tree, praying and meditating until he could be able to gain some level of God consciousness. And he was ready that if he had to die there, he was ready to do it. In other words, it came to a point that nothing was as important to him as being able to have God consciousness. Everything else became secondary. So, as he was in this meditation, all kinds of challenges started happening. Just as we remember in the Bible, when Jesus did his 40 days and 40 nights fasting, just before he was ready to stop the fast, there's so many challenges. So we say Maya or Satan or martyr and Tibetan conceptions. So the idea was that temptation, evil force, evil presence began to try to attack his consciousness. So then what happened is that first it came in the form of like so much lust. He started having all these visions of so many like attractive beings with the opposite sex, and it was calling Lorraine. And then later, after he didn't give in to that, he started becoming very fearful, and there was like tremendous like thunder and storms and things like this, and it was to distract him, but he didn't get bothered by that. So one thing after another, lust, and then fear, and then calamity, so many things were coming in his consciousness. But even though these things were coming, it just remain fixed. So just like in the case of Jesus, as he was engaged in doing the work of his Father. Tell my sister she can come. Please come. As he was doing the activities, even though he was doing the right thing, there was still so much challenge. It's not that just by doing the right thing, then there's no temptation. So here Jesus was after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. Then Satan appears and says, hey, if you're the Son of God, huh? Then if you're actually the Son of God, then why don't you turn these stones into bread? Here you are starving. And if you're actually favored by God, then why is he letting you starve? And if you are his son, then you should have certain potency, so why don't you feed yourself by turning these stones into bread? Jesus was not disturbed by it. Then he approached him again. So, if you're a son of God, God will protect you. So why don't you just jump off this bridge? Why don't you jump off this mountain? And one test after another. And you know the famous words, Satan, get behind me. So similar, Buddha was tested this way. And tests are an ongoing part of the unfoldment of spiritualists. As you take tests, you pass tests, then you go to the next stage until there's spiritual graduation, so to speak. So it's shown by the great sons of God, like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Buddha, that it's not that they lived a life of just simplicity, but their life also had many, many challenges, but they led that life. This is all the child, the mother child. They experienced those things for the benefit of, for the people to see what's necessary in order to be able to become realized, in order to get the full mercy of God. We have to sort of prove ourselves by certain perseverance and determination. So then, as Buddha had this experience of all of these tests, and finally he just said, as Lord Jesus did, go somewhere else, get behind me, I'm not going to be concerned about the things that you are presenting. Now after that, it says in the Bible, after Jesus had went through all this austerity, got tested to that extent, did not give in, then the other part of his mission began to unfold. So similarly, when Buddha had this level of determination, did not give in, remained fixed, then he acquired a certain level of God consciousness called nirvana. And that is an experience of going beyond the form of material energies. It's an experience of coming in contact with a oneness that's connected with all things. It's the real experience that people try to somehow connect with when they have a psychedelic drug or a drug experience. It's an artificial imposition where often one will have certain experiences of the senses that go beyond the normal experiences, but it's perverted, but often it brings a kind of a oneness with various energies that are there, and some sort of intoxication. But this experience of intoxication is genuine and far beyond any just stimulation. See, intoxication is a natural thing. As we become more and more spiritually advanced, we begin to reach levels of heights of ecstasy that goes far beyond any type of experience we have with any drug, any type of stimulant. Because mundane life is mundane. And there's always some desire for some higher pleasure, higher connection. That's a natural thing. But unfortunately, people take external stimulus and try to bring out that internal experience. So as Buddha experienced that, then he got another test. See, it's not that because you're trying to be spiritual, then Satan or Maya says, so you're spiritual, I'll bother somebody else who's not. Or not that as you excel, and he says, okay, you passed this test, now you're finished. But tests happen as for the person to go head a little farther, and a little farther. And then at some level, there's no more tests. So the tests were going on in such ways. So then Satan or Maya appears and says, now look at you. You've tried to acquire God consciousness, and now you've got this heavy, heavy realization, heavy knowledge, deep experiences. What is the value? who are you going to share it with? So you wasted all your time forgetting this, and you had deep compassion and trying to help people, and now you got this, and who's going to understand you? Because as you acquire a very high level of God consciousness, you don't act or think the same. Because the mind and the awareness opens up, and you're aware of so many things, past, present, and future, and many times, many levels of realization, and past life, so many different things. Communicating with all kinds of entities. So, if one doesn't kind of tune himself down, especially a Nietzsche said that there's beings who come in from the spiritual world, and their level of advancement is so high that if they act normal, it would seem as if they were crazy. Because they would be just swarming in just pools of ecstasy. They would be just so absorbed in love and in high level of consciousness that it would seem like a mad person. They hear some music, they hear some sound, they see some picture, they see something spiritual, and it would just enhance their consciousness to such an extent that sometimes the body would go into contortion. It would be almost like an epileptic fit. But it would be that there would be so much levels of pleasure and happiness that the body would have difficulty trying to balance and contain. And so, beings who have that level of realization, they actually tune themselves down so they can seemingly be able to be more normal and function in environments where they don't impose on people and cause problems. So, here, Maya or Satan was saying, so now you've had this experience, who are you going to share it with? And people are going to think that you're completely crazy if you act upon it, so you wasted your time. So it's like a last snare to try to get him to lose his strong intenseness. And all of these stories, if you look at the lives of any of the great prophets, any of the great acharyas, all of these stories are for humankind to learn something from, to see how to move in our spiritual lives, to be able to attain God, who's in consciousness. See, in Sanskrit, we define this world. Bhumya Navavaya Kama Burevacha Ahankratyame Vinavakrityashtana. This material world is comprised of lower energies of God, or like separated energies. And there are medium, and there are high, totally internal spiritual energies that are energies and connections that is everyone's rightful association and claim. We've kind of cheated ourselves from such. So temporarily, we're away from those sort of contexts. So after that test, and he didn't give in to it, but he thought, even if I can just share this with one person, if I can just share this with the few sadhus or sages who I started initially studying with, still I'll do that. Because this is so powerful, I'll share with whoever I can. And it does happen. Is that sometimes one who gains realization then begins to feel, but how can I explain this? How can I share this? How can I give this? And if the compassion isn't strong, then sometimes people will resort to just living to themselves. So many yogis and rishis who live in the Himalayas, who live in caves, you'll find this in many cultures. You'll find, like in Ethiopia, you'll find priests who live in caves by themselves. You'll find in the Himalayas, you'll find in Rishikesh, you'll find in some of the areas of Latin America. So sometimes people have gained a certain realization, and they're not so much communicators or not in a position of sharing it. And so they just take their physical bodies, they live in a cave, and they put the physical body there, and they jump out of it. It's like you wear different clothes. So you can jump in, if you put the clothes on, you put it out. It's not that they're spending all those years in the cave. There are yogis who only come out of the caves every 12 years, every 6 years. So it is natural for having pleasure and associations. So it's not that they are just in that place by themselves, looking at the walls of the cave. But they have mastered the science of not being affected by the physical body so much. And so they see the physical body as like a botheration, almost like a burden. And therefore, it's like carrying something heavy that's distracting, that's limited. So they put that physical body there, and they go with the astral body and have all kinds of experiences with angels and apsaras and gandharvas and visit other universes and things of this nature. So, as Buddha processed all of these things, then he was later able to give so much help to the world based on that. So, in our spiritual involvements, please come. In our spiritual involvements, we should never be disturbed by tests. Never should we think that because we take to a spiritual life, then there is no longer any complexities. We should realize that the tests are there really to allow us to go to the next stage, And the idea, for instance, of rites of passages or samskara is that individuals take their tests, they take that with support, they take that in community, they take that in association. See, some of the most powerful things that people do in modern society, they more and more do it alone. But in spiritual societies, in ancient culture, there's no question of doing important things alone. Just like this, you take something like marriages. Now, more and more, a man meets a girl meets a man, a boy meets a boy, and they decide, okay, let's go for it. But when there is culture and spirituality, there is so much consideration about that coming together. Because you're not marrying a person, but you are marrying into a family. You're married into a culture. You're married into a tribe. You're married into a community. And you see your identity as part of a community. See, now people having mental breakdown, maybe suicide, taking more than drug intoxications. And sometimes it has a lot to do with individuals finding it so difficult in struggling as they're struggling seemingly alone. Even though it can be so much in some type of associations, in business, as musicians, as sportsmen, or whatever. But still the person feels alone. Why? Because so much of the modern society is a take society. So much of the modern society is based on the kind of, Darwinian conception of mankind conquering over nature, rather than coexisting with nature, rather than trying to be in awe about the power of the Godhead, and trying to see how to be in harmony with it. So once we begin to lose a sense of community, or a sense of seeing each other in relationships or services, then what happens is that each person starts struggling by him or herself, and things that are important becomes hard to be able to do them successfully because you don't have support. You realize in environments where there is more sense of spiritual culture, there is less divorce. There is less complexities or problems in male-female relationships. Why? Because when the family, the community, looks on the relationship, then when there's a problem, you have the ability to go and to connect with people who care about you, who feel a serious investment about the relationship, and therefore they try to give you advice or give you counseling based on how everybody is going to be able to benefit. But if you've done that relationship on your own, and in some cases people are not even giving the blessings for it, in some cases they even want to see it, fall apart, then how much more difficult it becomes in being able to have a sense of a holistic type of relationship. And then how difficult it becomes for the children, because if they don't see more and more successful family life, successful relationships, then they get the